Welcome to another episode of Where It Was Made. I am your host, Ryan Coltrera, and I am here with the writer of one of the greatest films of all time, Jaws, Mr. Carl Gottlieb. Thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
Now, speaking of, when was the last time you've been back to Martha's Vineyard?
Probably about 3-4 years ago. I went back for one of the annual Jaws fests.
Right.
And a lot of fans were there, and got a chance to talk to them and sign my book. I did a book signing while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And, just generally do all the things that we are heirs to when we worked on the Fish movie.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about the cabin where you guys were writing and your experience there and kind of what happened to it after?
The company had rented a house for Stephen. It was a summer rental home. It had been built as a rental property by a guy named Judge Tarlow. It was the Tarlow house.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the problems when you're on location is Stephen had just finished a difficult location down in the Southwest, in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
When you're shooting on location, at the end of the day, especially if you're director or producer, above the line editor, concerned with everything.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, you wrap, then you rush back to look at dailies, and then you try to shower quickly and go out for dinner. Where do you go for dinner? There's always you go to try to find a restaurant. You eat at the hotel. You eat at the same place all the time. So to save all that time, Stephen said, "Look, if you rent a house for me and get a housekeeper who will make breakfast and dinner, lunch obviously will be on the set, I don't have to worry about all that stuff." And because I was sharing a house with Stephen, I didn't have to worry about it either. So it was an efficient way to make use of the space. It was living space and a creative space. And when I wasn't on the set as an actor, I'd be in the house typing away.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, I have from the period, I have hardly any memories except sitting at a desk typing,
Mm-hmm.
pacing around, thinking of things to type. And then the rest of the time I was on the set because I was an actor in the movie. And,
Right.
my presence was required out on the sets. I'd have to be there in costume and makeup and wardrobe. So there were hardly any memories that were non-movie related.
Fair enough.
There's one in the book about Murray Hamilton being skunked on the way home after a night out, and not even knowing that he was skunked, just falling asleep in the lobby, and, stinking up the place. And you'd have to read the Jaws log by Carl Gottlieb.
And you have to if you haven't. The ultimate behind-the-scenes book. Well, I guess on that note, has there been any experiences since the film on Martha's Vineyard that you kind of cherish?
Well, I always like going back there because everything that made it a great location make it a great place to visit. It's a wonderful tourist destination, and usually I don't go there in high season. I wouldn't go there during the summer unless I had a house on the water, or
Right.
unless I was spending $25,000 a week on a resort experience. So in October or in the spring when there's nobody there, then it's quite a beautiful place. Unspoiled vistas of Nantucket Sound,
Very nice.
green rolling country, countryside, little farmlands, the waterfront communities like Edgartown, which was a whaling port at one point.
Right.
Very picturesque, lovely 18th century New England architecture.
Beautiful town.
It's great. It's just lovely just to walk around.
It is, yeah. Were there any moments that you had to fight for to keep in the film as a writer?
No, because most of what I wrote was either new material or fixing existing material. So if I was working on it, it kind of had to be in the movie.
Fair enough.
And the great thing for a writer working under those circumstances is you're not going to be rewritten. There's no
True.
time for anybody to rewrite you. Whatever you write is what they're going to shoot.
Right.
So you kind of have to get it right the first time, or trust the director to keep it on track if it starts to wander. And if it starts to wander in a good creative direction, and Stephen was a great director, and he'd let the actors either ad-lib or create beats that didn't exist before.
Right.
One of those moments is the kid at the dinner table who's like doing,
Right.
mimicking. What happened was we had a little kid actor who was just bored waiting for the setups, and he started imitating Roy. So Roy called Stephen aside and said, "Look, watch what he's doing."
Right.
And the kid would mimic him, and Steve said, "Great, roll it. Let's get that."
That's perfect.
So we did, and there's a lot of found moments like that in the movie where the actors and the director and occasionally the writer would, have an inspiration, and we were free to do that, and then it got captured and it wound up on the film.
And there is a lot of moments in that film that are from a place of comedy, and you were from a world of comedy yourself before you got involved in Jaws.
Exactly.
Can you kind of take us through what brought you from comedy into a film like this?
It's kind of almost pure Hollywood. Stephen and I had the same agent. He was a new kid in town. I was an established comedy variety writer, and I was, at the time that I left to do Jaws, I was happily employed as a story editor on The Odd Couple,
Right.
a series on ABC with Jack Klugman and Tony Randall. And I came from a performing background in improvisational comedy. So Stephen's first thought was when he got the job, he said, take a look at the script and see if there's a part you could play, because it'd be great to have you on location for a while.
Gotcha.
And you could work with the actors or improvise things. And so I got hired first as an actor, playing the part of Meadows. And then when they needed the rewrite, my ideas kind of fit in with what Stephen thought and what the producers were willing to put up with from their young director. And everything we did after that was like either a collaboration or me in support of Stephen's vision.
Right. Was it difficult to write yourself out?
Very difficult. Hardest thing I ever did as an actor or writer was cut my part. But it was for the good of the picture, so we did it.
And that's that balance, right?
Yeah. Because in the scene where we discover the head in the boat, when we filmed it originally, it was during the daylight. Meadows is present for the moment, and when we were shooting it, I leaned out too far over the edge of the boat that we were using to approach the Ben Gardner boat.
Right.
And my center of gravity shifted, and I just went head first into the water. And because I was a secondary character, the wardrobe department hadn't thought to double my costume, so there was, we couldn't get that shot that day.
Right.
Move on to something else, and either come back for it later, or as it turns out, rethink it as a nighttime shot after the family dinner, and it's much more effective that way. The scream is much more effective. The head reveal. I think there's no spoilers in a 41-year-old film, so. It worked out ultimately. The film was edited together. That scene was shot in a tank, either MGM or some Hollywood facility where they had underwater photography, and it was serviceable. But Stephen thought he could do it better, and the producers, who were notoriously cheap and stingy, didn't want to add any more money to the budget. We were well over budget by that point. It was in post-production, we were editing.
Right.
And Stephen said, I don't care, I really want to shoot that scene again. So, I'll pay for it myself. I don't think he did, but it was shot as if he were going to pay for it. So they put the relevant piece of the boat on a truck over at the studio and trucked it out to the editor's house. Verna Fields has a little tract house in the valley on Costello Street, and they tarped over the pool, put the got the mold of the head.
Right.
We brought everything they needed. Rex Metz was the underwater cameraman who had done a lot of the underwater photography on the movie. And they assembled the crew, and minimal crew.
Sure.
And I went out, got a half gallon of milk and poured it in the water to make it, to give it some cloudiness.
That works.
And Stephen made the shot until he was satisfied with it. And to his credit, it's one of the biggest screams in the movie.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's done and timed exactly right.
I'll admit, no matter how many times I see it that moment, I still get tensed up, and I, once in a while, block my ears.
For the camera.
All right, so during the shooting of the film, how did the locals respond to having a film crew on their island for the first time?
We had some classic town and gown differences.
Right.
There were rich people on the island who valued their space that they had paid a lot of money for. And when a motion picture company, especially a fairly large studio production, shows up, it's kind of disruptive. They take a lot of hotel rooms, they require a lot of extra services, and there's and they're not tourists. I mean, they're there to work. It's the old saying, it's a location, not a vacation. And there was a divide kind of right down the middle of the year-round residents. The ones who were making money from the company were happy to see us, and those who were inconvenienced or whose businesses suffered because of the crowds and the limited access, they didn't like us. The best example is that the Quint's house in Menemsha, that lovely picturesque tall building.
Beautiful.
That's a set. And the locals, who were not inclined to make things easy for us, said it had to be built to code. You couldn't build it like a set with false walls and just put it up and knock it down. You had to actually pour a foundation and put in wires and plumbing and build it to code. Post a $50,000 bond to guarantee that you would take it down again. Which the studio, grumbled, but they did that. And it's a great set, and it serves the purpose. And all the people who wanted it taken down, years later, said, "Oh shit, that would have been a really good tourist attraction."
Yes, it would have.
And it's still a vacant lot. If you go back to Menemsha, there's just a concrete slab there. And if Quint's house was there, it fit right in. It was beautifully designed by Joe Alves to match the existing architecture on the little inlet. It would have been great, but because they were pissy about it, they missed out.
They're lost,
Generations of tourist dollars from, let's go see Quint's house. And they could have sold little shark jaws and souvenirs.
Yeah, when I was there filming, I had two different groups of people come up to me and ask, do you know where the shack is from Jaws? And I had to be the one to break the news, it was right here. But at least now it's it's a little public garden area. It's pretty, but
what ultimately happened, I think the whole island finally came to terms with the fact that yes, we have an iconic bit of architecture here. I feel sorry for the people who bought the Brody house, because they get a lot of looky-loos come by and they say nobody lives here.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a very and now it's it's right on the water. It's a very expensive piece of real estate.
Oh, it's a beautiful area.
Yeah. But that's true of any fabled location.
Right.
And for a long time, the Orca, the boat, had been kind of rotting in the sand on a beach on an inaccessible part of the island. But people would trek through a marsh to get there, and then they would take a piece of it. And now, there's nothing left. The entire boat was taken apart, piece by piece, by souvenir hunters.
Personally, who were your influences as a screenwriter, not just in this movie, but just in your career?
I loved, and still love, the journeyman writers who created the great studio movies, and they were playwrights and journalists, most of them. Hector MacArthur and Nunnally Johnson, who wrote Grapes of Wrath. There are wonderful writers in the studio system who just went to work every day and created memorable characters. Dalton Trumbo's, the movie Trumbo
Yeah.
gives us an idea of the kind of work that was being done on a daily basis by the studios. And I love the way they told stories in the old days.
Yeah,
Very,
same.
very, very lean, very efficient. Films weren't 2.5 hours. Films were 100 minutes, 105 minutes.
Right.
And all the secondary characters lived and had backstories. I mean,
I was raised on those type of movies, and in addition to the show, I do direct films, and that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to bring back personally. On a side note from the show.
I wish you luck.
Thank you. So now I know this is kind of like being asked to choose between children, but did you have a favorite character to write for?
Well, Quint has the most colorful language. And the language is based on a local Martha's Vineyard character named Craig Kingsbury, who plays a fisherman. He plays Ben Gardner in the movie.
Right.
But Craig had a unique style of speech and was quite the character on the island. So Stephen said, follow him around with a tape recorder. So I paid attention to what Craig was saying, and some of his words wound up in Shaw's mouth. But actually, the character I like writing the most for was Dreyfus, because being a college-educated guy myself, I identified with the guy who was the creature of intellect.
Right.
The three legs of the stool, or the three corners of the triangle in that story, are primal man, by Quint, rational man, Hooper, and then every man, Brody, caught in the middle,
right.
With the three of them having to cooperate in order to beat the fish. So they're forced by life and death to adapt. And the reason I liked writing for Dreyfus was he had the most to say in terms of exposition. He had a lot of science that he had to get across to the audience. And I had to write it so that it didn't sound like a lecture, that it sounded like, a passionate guy arguing a point, but at the same time he's getting information out to the audience about sharks. So I like writing for Dreyfus. I really liked writing for Lee Fierro, the actress who slaps Brody. That was a challenge. That one speech was a challenge.
It's a beautiful scene.
And Scheider was easy, because the best thing about writing on that movie was the fact that I was with the actors every day, and I wasn't writing like an abstract character that would be played by an actor to be named at a future date. I was writing for people who I could listen to, so I could get their rhythms, I could hear how they personally phrased things, and then I could write for them. And Shaw, of course, being a really classically trained actor, he'd say anything you wrote and make it perfect. Right.
All right, so let's talk about the Jaws log for a minute. That was kind of, as a film fan, my first peek behind the curtain. I read it well before DVD extras were a thing, and have read it a million times since. I have the 30th anniversary there. What was it like to kind of revisit that book? I know you added some content.
Yeah, it was great. The way the book came about was the idea of cross-marketing was relatively new in 1974. And there was a notion at the studio, they would do like a souvenir book or a coffee table book with three parts. The director, the producers, and Peter Benchley would all write something, and then they put a lot of pictures from the studio, from the stills. And then everybody got busy, and Benchley was working on something, and the producers were too busy, and I was going to ghostwrite Stephen's third of it. He said, "Would you do my? I got too much to do." And I said, "Fine." They said, "Well, okay, you'll have to write the book." Kind of a making of book. And I had a couple of models in mind, specifically a book by Lillian Hellman called Picture. I went off in isolation, and and meanwhile I had lived through all the experience. I didn't have to do a lot of research. I didn't have to do these kind of interviews because I had been there for most of that stuff.
Sure.
And then I went out and I did interviews to fill in the gaps, and they all found their way into the book. Then 25 years later, for the 25th anniversary edition, I had recovered the publishing rights Dell had let them lapse. And it was originally published as a cheap paperback. It was like $1.50, and they sold it at airports and supermarkets, and it sold 1.5 million, 2 million copies, so I did very well. The most money I made from Jaws was from the book. So, but then when the 25th anniversary edition came up, I had the opportunity to do endnotes, and I said, here's where I can put in things that, I couldn't talk about in the beginning.
Sure.
I could put in stuff that I had found out after the book had been published. Some people had come up to me and said, you didn't get that quite right. So I could revisit everything, and I could correct some misapprehensions that had crept into the public eye. For instance, that another screenwriter had written the Indianapolis speech, which is a great moment in the movie, and it was actually more of Robert Shaw's doing than anybody else's.
Right.
I mean, I devote a few pages of that to correct that impression, and it's the best-selling book about the making of a movie ever written, and I'm kind of proud of it. And like yourself, a lot of people were influenced by it. They all, Bryan Singer, Steven Soderbergh,
right,
Eli something or other. Anyway, a lot, and when I meet people professionally who are in the business now as writers and producers and directors, a lot of them will say, your book, I was 12 or I was 15 or I was 18 when I read your book, and it kind of made me want to make movies. So I have that to be thankful for and to be happy about.
I have to count myself among those ranks. That was my first behind-the-scenes book. I had 3 different copies because one of them pretty much fell apart.
Well, the original got shredded easy. It was very cheap paper, yellows. Every now and then at a book signing, someone will bring me their precious copy that they bought during the summer of '75.
I wish mine had survived.
Yeah, not many did.
Yeah. If I could just detour one quick question before my final question.
Sure.
Just kind of a personal one for me, because Quint is clearly one of my favorite movie characters. I know him and Richard Dreyfuss kind of butted heads. What was your interaction with him like?
I got along with him fine because we're both writers. He understood writers. He's a novelist himself and a playwright. He's got 5 published novels. He wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning play.
Right.
But he was enough of a provocateur that he knew that if he would butt heads with Dreyfuss off screen, it would bring something to their on-screen relationship.
Right.
So he was kind of merciless with Richard. There was a moment where the sticks would come into the scene. It would be Dreyfuss's close-up, so Shaw wasn't in the shot. So as the sticks clapped just before they left the scene, and Richard would have to start performing, Quint and Robert Shaw would say, "Mind your mannerisms." And try acting when somebody has just said, "Mind your mannerisms." Because he knew Richard. Richard has mannerisms. I mean, they repeat in other films, and it's just there's tools of the actor's trade. There's things in his tool bag that he uses, and Shaw was smart enough to know that if they were just buddy all the time, it might not work on the screen.
Right.
So he said, I'll take a chance that this guy's not going to be my friend, but the result will be good for the movie. And Richard and Richard understood that too. It worked for Dreyfuss as well. And
it shows.
Yeah.
So to bring it back around to locations for the final question, and this is kind of like having to pick your favorite character, but as far as visual goes, what location from the film tells a story to you the most? What is your favorite place that was used in Jaws? If you can do it.
Well, it's the floating one. It's the boat. The boat is the 4th character, and it was, as they say in England, purpose built. It was a fishing boat that the company had acquired, and that Joe redesigned in ways that commercial fishermen looked at it and said, "What the hell is that? I mean, why all that glass in the cabin? Who's going to clean that?
Right.
And it's going to break if we hit a big wave." So it's kind of impractically built.
Right.
But unless you are a fisherman who harpoons shark, or you're not going to mind. And it has, in its own battered way, it's an extension of Quint's character.
Right.
And it's his home, and they are the guests in it, and they have to, as he said, I'm master, mate, and commander.
Right.
And the boat has such character, and below decks it's like his house, and above decks it's his workspace, and it's kind of an extension of the set that was built in New Hampshire. So it is an extension of Quint. It's clearly Quint's boat. It's not anybody else's boat.
Right, exactly.
And that's why I loved it. Brody's house could be anybody's house. Town hall is town hall. Quint's shed was picturesque, but we're not there a long time. There's one dialogue, couple of dialogue scenes, and then you're out of it. But you spend a lot of time on the boat, and it is pivotal to their success. And then when the boat fails and the boat starts to sink, you're losing half a regiment. If it was a war movie, it would mean your left flank was breached when the boat starts to sink.
Right.
So the boat's my favorite place.
Okay, perfect. Good answer. All right, well, that should do it for this interview. On a personal note, I saw Jaws when I was 6 years old. Far too young to have seen it. But I grew up in a New England town that was, funded by beach tourism, so it has a very special place for me. And
where were you in New England?
York, Maine.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a smaller one, but we were a beach tourism town.
Yeah, sure.
And anyway, I credit it as being the movie that made me want to make movies. So I wanted to thank you very much
My
for
pleasure.
having that influence.
We'll go out and make
Thank
movies.
you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Great to interview you.